Hello and welcome to another Entopy webcast. In today's session, we're going to be talking about always-on intelligence. So this is, of course, a key concept within the unified intelligence stack. And I'm very lucky to be joined by Dan and Shahin. And together we're going to go through, what always-on intelligence is, why it matters. So why that concept is so foundational and fundamental to the unified intelligence concept. And obviously, we're going to explore some of the key technologies that enable always-on intelligence. Now, we're joining you at a very, very busy time for Entopy. We're slap bang in the middle of kind of event season. We've been here, there, and everywhere. We are going to continue this pace. We are going to continue to attend as many events as we can throughout 2026. So, follow us on social media and the email newsletters and the website and so on. If you see us at an event that you happen to be at, we'd love to meet new people and discuss these ideas. The other thing to mention at the top of this is that we have now launched the Unified Intelligence White Paper. So this is a document that we've produced that introduces unified intelligence as a concept. It's pretty comprehensive. It goes into lots of detail around many different aspects from what it is as a technology, the sort of enabling technologies that sit within the stack, how to adopt it, where to adopt it, etc., etc., etc. And it really, at its foundation, of its core, explores how AI needs to live and exist inside kind of real world operational context. So it's definitely worth downloading. It's not an Entopy promotional tool. It's absolutely talking about the concept more than anything else. But coming back to today's webcast, like I said, joined by Dan and Shahin. So thanks very much, guys, for joining me today. And I think a good sort of starting point would be to set out what we mean by always-on intelligence. So I'll come to each of you in a second. I mean, for me, always-on intelligence, the term always-on, the kind of clues in the name, but for me, it has two parts. The first part is that intelligence, real-world environments are dynamic, they're live operational contexts, so the intelligence needs to be always on. So this is about real-time data continuously updating, the ontology, the unified intelligence layer, and keeping that kind of live state, if you like, of what that real-world operational environment looks like. The second part is around proactive communication. So this is where we actually want the AI to prompt the human, as opposed to the human prompting the AI. So it's taking the intelligence to inboxes and so on and so forth. So from my perspective, it definitely has those distinct meanings. I think it will be the same for you, but I suppose what would be interesting is if you could just kind of color in some of those points, or maybe elaborate on them a little further. So Dan, if I could come to you first. Always on intelligence, what does it mean?
Yeah, well, the key thing with always on is that the situation's always going to be changing in any environment, any ecosystem. So let's say there's been a plan set out by a planning team. That plan, all the way up to the execution, that plan can change. Something can change out of their control, weather, something like that, incidents, and stuff that's in their control, something that the plan has changed. So always on intelligence needs to be able to capture that and then tell relevant stakeholders how to react to the plan change, and how does that change affect what's going to happen in the future. So sort of like running different impact scenarios to see, well, if you've changed this plan, this is now affecting the next plan and the next plan. So alerting people to that, like you say, taking it to people's inboxes, taking it to a Teams channel, however it needs to be consumed by the user, taking that intelligence to them instead of them having to dig down and find it.
I suppose it sort of mirrors what the environments it's designed to work in are, i.e. always on, very dynamic, live, things are always changing. Exactly. And what sort of use cases can you see always on intelligence kind of applying to? So we've seen it in port operations, we've seen it in logistics, and yesterday we were talking about dynamic resource planning.
Yeah, that's a real good one. Dynamic resource planning is somewhere where you can really see this, because the plan can change all the time. Ports is another good one as well. Anything from a slight weather change to a tidal window, anything like that, which can change really quickly. So being able to react to that plan, and also being able to basically adjust the plan as it goes through its life cycle.
I mean, everything has a plan.
Yes.
Resource planning, scheduling, staff scheduling, how you're going to, carry out a particular act or whatever. Everything starts with a plan. and then it hits reality
Yeah.
and things start to change. And essentially always on intelligence isn't the ability to follow that all the way through, capturing those changes and communicating.
That's right. Capturing the entire situation and everything that's related to that situation to see how that's going to affect the plan.
And then Shahin, so I guess it's the same sort of question. So from your point of view, always on, is there anything else we can kind of add that hasn't been said already?
Well, yes, there is this common way of using AI agents right now that is very reactive. It's like some person come sit in the dashboard and start talking with the chatbot or things like that, or asking an agent to do multiple stuff one after the other, or doing some kind of trigger when something happens. But this is very reactive. It's like someone has to come and sit and ask the AI to do something. What we are thinking and what we are actually having in mind is to make it proactive, to make it like an employee that sits in your operation and tries to understand everything and tries to tell you things before it happens and give you the reports and analysis before it's actually happened.
And I guess that's really important because you're right. The majority of adoption cases that I've seen of AI have largely been with one of these kind of chat windows, and then you're talking to it. And that's what we mean by episodic interaction with AI. It's happening in episodes, right? So a human being decides, okay, I need to go and ask this question, or I want to generate this content, or I want to conduct this research, which I guess is completely fine if your tasks, if your goals, if your use case is research, is analysis, but when it hits an operational context, it doesn't quite work, does it?
No, it doesn't. Well, the thing is, for the operators on the ground, it's very hard when you're in the middle of the operation, and it's very hard to come and sit and ask things. And the other thing is, asking an agent is a little bit intricate for some people, because there's a way to ask an agent, and the people has to understand it, has to learn that over time. But when we make it proactive, they don't even need to do that. It's just coming into their emails, coming into their MS Teams, anywhere that they can actually contact very fast.
And that's actually a really good point, isn't it, Dan? Because you're right, Shahin. There is a skill in how to prompt an AI.
Yeah, most definitely.
Right? So if you don't have that skill, the fact that it's episodic is one aspect of this, but the fact it's a human being that is asking, that is requesting that information from an AI, it needs to know how to ask.
That's right, yeah. A slight wording change can produce a totally different answer.
Yeah.
When you're talking to a chatbot or something like that. So having not to go through that learning curve for operators and whoever needs to be using the tool is good.
So picture the scene. We've now got a critical plan. The consequence of it going wrong are very high. The plan was set yesterday or this morning. It was signed off by everyone. And then reality happens. So now that plan is now put up against reality. Things start to change. Weather windows compress, parts break. There's a jam for a particular vehicle that's supposed to be at this destination by this particular time. Another job goes slightly longer than was expected and starts to impact this plan. So the reality is happening. The plan is now being tested and it's coming under significant stress. And you're an operator on the front line and you now need to make a decision as to what to do. And this is exactly where AI can provide enormous amounts of value. But the reality is you are not going to go to a chatbot and think, remember my prompt training. I need to make sure I get this question perfectly right. And I need to make sure I ask the agent correctly and hopefully I get the answer correct. That's just a fallacy, right?
No, yeah.
And then furthermore, the agent isn't going to have access to the unfolding picture because it doesn't have the second part of what we mean by always on, which is the continuously updating layer.
Yeah.
So when we talk about always on intelligence, we're talking about proactively communicating that information to users. So they don't need to prompt.
No, don't need to prompt.
Talk to me about what that looks like in practice. And I know we've discussed this on previous webcasts, but I want to kind of just before we move on to the technology of how it works and stuff, I really just want to visualize what this looks like.
Okay, yeah. So in any one of your scenarios there, something's happened along that chain that's going to affect the plan. So as soon as something like that is predicted to happen or is happening, the operator, let's say they get an email to say, this is happening to the plan. This is going to change the plan by X. So then what's going to happen to the next plan, or what's going to happen that you can do to solve this plan? What can you do? What can you move to mitigate the biggest risk to the plan? So that's the sort of content that is being taken to the operators. So this is happening. This is how it's going to affect the plan. And then anything you can do to recommendations on how.
And how's it sent to them? Emails.
So emails, Teams,
it
Slack.
could be a screen. It could be a screen, a live feed.
That's the thing. If the people, the users want to have it on a dashboard screen, they can. But most people like to have that pushed to them. So via an email, via a push notification, Teams alert, it's as long as it's taken to them.
And I suppose anyone, well, most people know how to interact with email.
Yes.
Most people know how to interact with Teams. Most people know how to read a teleprompter effectively.
Yeah.
So this is not, like prompting, something that we have to teach someone. It's not a tool that a human being needs to interact with. You know, when we produce dashboards, they are heads-up displays.
Yeah.
They're not designed to be interacted with. They're designed to be always on.
Yeah.
So I suppose when we deploy, the always on kind of has a sort of unintended benefit, if you like, of we don't really have to onboard people.
No, that's right. Yeah. So you got to also think about, say you're putting up a dashboard, right? There's going to be some, right. That's something new for someone to look at in their daily operation. That's something totally new. So they've got to decide, oh, actually, I've got to go look at that TV screen now, or however they're going to do it.
Or find the screen.
Or find a new screen, yeah. So that's adding something new to their operation. Whereas with emailing or Teams, these are tools that they're already using day to day. They might be using Teams to communicate across their team and their network. So pushing something into that channel is not changing their day to day. So that's a key thing with Always On as well.
And it's going where they live.
Yeah.
I mean, it turns the product, it turns what we do less about a software product and more into kind of this kind of command and control team. If you had a human command and control team sitting within your operation watching these situations unfold, they would be texting you, they would be emailing you, they might pick up the phone and speak to you, which is what AI can't yet do. But the always on, this part of the always on, the prompting of the human, is effectively the interface of unified intelligence.
Yeah.
And what we want this to be is very, very, very like this. Now, one of the dangers of this approach is that we create an avalanche of information. If this is always on, it's got an always updating or continuously updating intelligence layer, and it's looking at things and understanding how they evolve and communicating that, it can be very trigger happy, and it can start to swamp operators and create noise, not signal. I suppose this is where we come to memory. So one of the things that we are trying to do, and we'll come on to exactly what selection looks like, but well, actually, no, we're going to do selection first. So I suppose to do this, we need a capability within the agent to essentially look and understand what information within this continuously updating layer is worth communicating and what is not, right?
Yeah, definitely. Think of it as I said, it's like an employee that sits in your operation, tries to learn everything. It has basic knowledge about the domain knowledge, that's how the operator are going to work, how the operations are working. But after a while, it tries to pick the things that are most important. And the things that are most important and is being mostly used by the operator, or the information is getting the better feedback from the people that are actually using it, it gets into the above. And in the memory layer, the things that are most important becomes heavier in the memory. So the next time when someone try to get some kind of report or something in their email or whatsoever, they're gonna have the best context to the best timing. And it's like the best, what we actually want is the best context for the people that they need it. So
it's trying to reduce all of the information down to the single most important thing that I can surface to you.
Exactly.
And we actually want the agent to be quiet most of the time, don't we? So this selection process is quite clear in terms of what we're trying to achieve. But what other things is it selecting on? So what other aspects is it looking at? I suppose it's got spatial understanding, temporal understanding, and so on and so forth.
Yeah. How critical is that going to be?
Yeah.
And it pretty much will start with like rules that you'll bake into the intelligence, but then that'll learn over time. It'll see, we've seen these before, how were they solved, and so on. So and then it will learn on that, and that will be baked into the memory. The memory will take in things like the situation, but then everything around it as well. Sort of like meta, if you like, to say, this was the weather at this time, this was this at this time, this was this at this time, so on, across the whole operation, along with the situation. So then it has a real good understanding of finding similar events that have happened in the past as well. So it can learn when was the best time to alert to that.
So the kind of self-selection process or the active selection process from the agent starts off with rules.
Yep.
So when we go into an environment, we've got to give it some context.
Yeah.
We want you to basically surface, like we watch all of this. We want you to surface information when it looks like this. Thresholds, rules, there. But then what you're saying is as it lives, it starts to build experience. It starts to build situational memories.
Yeah.
And over time, it can build up enough of those situational memories so that the future situation or the situation it's in now, it can effectively say, I've seen this before. If I was just using rules, this would 100% be something I need to surface.
Yeah.
But last time, nothing happened. So I'm just going to hold off.
Yeah. And basically monitor that situation.
Yeah.
And if that then escalates more or anything like that, that's when it might say, oh, actually, it's hit a threshold now, I'm gonna push this out.
And within that memory, just I suppose going another layer beneath how this kind of works. So I suppose this isn't like could I do this from if I was to get given a load of historical data of an operation? Right, I haven't necessarily lived the situations. If I start from scratch, day zero, customers give me loads of information. Why do I have to start with rules? Why can't I have memory of all of that past data day one?
Well, the thing is, if you want to write rules for everything, you're gonna end up with overload of the rules, and they will somehow conflict with each other after a while. So and there are things that you might not even see from the beginning. So it's like there is some unwritten rules that as an employee or as an operator in your operation, this is happening all the time, but there's nothing that makes it a rule that is like for everywhere.
It's like an unwritten rule.
Exactly. And basically with that, if we have that load of data, instead of just making rules out of that, we will try to put it into this ontology, then try to use it into the memory. So the memory, after a while, after interacting with the operation, it will understand, okay, this rule is being overly used. This one is not that important, It's
lived experience.
It's living the experience.
And there is a difference between living it and then just looking at past data, because I suppose that data's not gone through the ontology. That was an interesting point you just said there. By the time it hits the memory, it's gone through the ontology.
Yeah.
It's lived the situation, and that's what's going into the memory, right?
Exactly, yeah.
And then each one of these memories, like you were saying, I suppose can have metadata that sort of...
Exactly, and like give itself a context as well, if you like, to give itself a context of that situation, which is... With a load of backdata, you can do some of that, but it's always going to be greater if it can go through the entire operation.
So vessel journeys, for example, if the weather was particularly bad, this particular situation is now related to bad weather, this type of ship, this kind of day, this kind of... Very, very interesting. I think just kind of rounding this off, I suppose all of this, the always on intelligence layer, that component, the continuously updating unified intelligence layer, the ontology, the real-time data feeds. We spoke about micromodels and real-time data feeds in previous podcasts, and we're going to have kind of dedicated ones moving forward. That's happening. And then this idea of actively communicating information intelligence to operators in familiar channels, with the ability to actively select relevant data so that we don't overload, is an enormously powerful thing. Right? What does this mean for organizations? Right? So whereas organizations today, let me ask you it a different way. From the customers that we're working with, how do they currently manage these kind of situations?
You'll often find that most companies will be a bit more reactive. So this is taking it into the proactive, basically, starting to get ahead of those situations before they're happening, and basically to mitigate that risk. Some risks and something you're not going to be able to avoid, but what can you do to make that less impactful on your business? So it's making it more proactive instead of reactive.
How about you, Shahin? What do you think?
We know that by the experience that the operators have over the years into their business, they can actually see things, they can manage the impacts of the things that go wrong. But the goal is to make it to put it in a short time. So it's like when something's happening, until the people on the ground understand that it's happening and try to solve it, that will take a while and that would cost a lot for the operation. So what we do is to give that data with the recommendation and suggestion to how to resolve that before it actually happens, and giving them time to think about it and to understand the rationale behind it and say, yeah, all right, this makes sense, let's do this. So this will take the load off the operators on the ground.
Definitely. And also from an operator point of view, this is always on. And it's always, put it into like your employee situation. It's an employee that doesn't have a break, doesn't have a shift pattern. So this is always on. So if when changing shifts are happening in a business or something like that, this is always on. So that information's going across to everybody in the business. So it's not just like this operator knows a little bit more about this situation than this operator. For example, this is always just one thing that's always there.
And it's also how much can human operators realistically monitor at once?
Yeah.
When we talk about global networks, it's impossible. You have lots of different teams. With an always-on intelligence layer, that could potentially be a unified intelligence layer across the entire network. So it's the scale at which the always-on intelligence capability can be deployed as well. Yeah. Cool. Okay, so I think that's given a good overview of always-on intelligence. What we've done is we've kind of started by explaining what it is. We've spoken about why it matters. So we've discussed, current episodic analysis tools and chatbots and things like that, and why they work in certain contexts. They just don't really work in operational contexts. We've discussed the kind of key thing that makes always-on intelligence work, which is active selection enabled by memory. And then we've just had, the kind of round off around what this means for organizations. So thanks, Dan. Thanks, Shahin. And thank you to everyone for listening. Be sure, I must stress this, be sure to check out our website. I mentioned this at the start, but go and download and read the Unified Intelligence White Paper. And also follow our blog, because we're continuously talking about things like this. So yeah, thanks for listening. See you again soon.